Okay, so we have one more talk before the break. We have Jasper who's going to talk about porting Puppet to OpenBSD, and then we'll take a break at 2:50.
All right. Is it on? Yeah, seems like it. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about porting Puppet to OpenBSD. I've been using Puppet for quite some time, basically exclusively on OpenBSD. And after a lot of time of using it, I thought it was time to improve the status quo and to improve some of the providers, the actual platform dependent part. Yep, sure. Like this? Okay, so this will be a short overview of that journey. And while Puppet is largely multi-platform, the operating system specific details are coming from the providers. And it's not only Puppet that I'll be talking about, but also Vector and PuppetDB and some other components. So these are some of the items that I'd like to go through. A quick introduction about myself, as well as OpenBSD. Some, OpenBSD oddities, as well as a quick overview of the Puppet stack and what was done to several key components to improve their workings on OpenBSD. Then some current challenges or outstanding tasks. Some small list of best practices that, even though they're generally quite trivial to adhere to, it'll make a tremendous difference in how portable your module is. Oops. Okay, so my name is Jasper Lievisse Adriaanse. I'm a OpenBSD developer and have been for about 8 years now. I'm mostly involved in porting and packaging third-party applications, whether it's GNOME, which I actually do work a lot on, as I'm also a GNOME developer, where, not surprisingly, I focus on portability, mainly to OpenBSD. And there's another side to porting that's porting OpenBSD to a different CPU architecture. And I spent my time working on porting OpenBSD to the Octeon, the multi-core MIPS 64 CPUs. And of course, I wouldn't be standing here if I wasn't also contributing to Puppet. Let me quickly elaborate on my employer, Mtier, in whose time I've been doing most of the work that I talk about later. So, basically all of us are OpenBSD developers, but aside from that, we're contributors to many of the key components that we use. So it's OpenBSD, Puppet, GNOME, LibreOffice, and others as well. So what do we do aside from OpenBSD? Puppet, of course, and as well as Zabbix and Bacula, backup and monitoring, and basically puppetizing all components of the list. So we started using Puppet about 5 or 6 years ago. At the time, mainly as a content distribution system to our customers who were exclusively using OpenBSD. And someone asked this morning whether or not OpenBSD can be run as a Puppet master. And yes, of course it can run as a Puppet master, aside from just a dumb agent of sorts, which just applies the manifest. It runs the master, it runs PuppetDB, mcollective. There's not really a part of Puppet that I can think of that does not run on OpenBSD. Well, maybe Razor, but I've not tried that yet. So there's also things outside of the main area of focus that we do. The interesting thing comes with the long-term support and bin patches. Since in OpenBSD there's no real way to update a part of your base system without updating the whole base system. And well, some issues such as the OpenSSL issues, people really had to either manually compile a new libSSL and applications that statically linked against libSSL. But we came up with the solution of bin patches a couple of years ago. And combined with Puppet, it's just another package that gets installed on your system. And of course, you do need to restart any services using the library. But deploying the package is just adding another package resource, and your SSL libraries are all up to date. So a little bit about OpenBSD. I assume that most of you have some idea what it is. Just in case you don't, it's a Unix-like operating system with a very strong focus on correctness of the code, as well as the documentation. The kernel, userland, and documentation are all maintained in a single repository, and because of that, it's code is not considered complete unless there's good documentation for it. And as I mentioned, there are a lot of third-party applications available through the ports and packages system. I think at this moment there are about 8,000, which is not that much compared to FreeBSD with tens of thousands, but well, most of our ports do actually build. So OpenBSD isn't just an operating system. There have been several sub-projects that were spun off. Most well known would be OpenSSH, but there's also AnonCVS, OpenBGPD, and quite recently OpenSMTPD, which a couple of weeks ago replaced SendMail as the default MTA in OpenBSD. And well, OpenBSD runs on many platforms. Actually, it runs on about 21 different platforms and CPU architectures. And that's everything ranging from the shiny new multi-core Intel or AMD 64s, as well as the ancient MVMA, the Motorola 88K CPUs, and even Zorus. So OpenBSD, just like any other modern operating system, runs on fancy, albeit a bit boring, standard Dell servers, but also old junk, may I say, as these. But don't worry, Puppet won't run on these since there's no Ruby running on M88K. But OpenBSD also runs on small devices like these, which are the Sharp Zorus devices, which I think the OpenBSD developer who ported OpenBSD to it is actually present. And well, sorry to say, it's a tad underpowered, and running Puppet on these is quite challenging. And I must confess, I do run Puppet on my Zorus, aside from Spark 64. So some general considerations or OpenBSD oddities. When it comes to modules, one thing that is often seen is that they just assume that there would be a root group, which is totally fine on Linux, but on OpenBSD it's not going to fly. There's no root group. There is something identical to it, but it just has a different name. It's called the wheel group. And in Linux, at least in Puppet's view, users with an UID below 500 are considered system users, and users with a UID above that are just regular users. Well, this would not really be a problem unless you're purging your user resources. And Puppet will happily keep all the users below 500, but remove all the other users, which on OpenBSD means that even the system users with a UID ranging from 500 to 1,000 will also get zapped. There is a patch for this in OpenBSD ports. It's not yet submitted in a pull request, but it's on the list of things to send up. But it's another thing that people are generally not aware of. As the packages on OpenBSD come with flavors, these are compile time options, whether or not to enable certain features. Also, the package resource takes a flavor argument, which well, makes the ensure latest attribute quite tricky. That's also one of the reasons why it has not been merged yet, due to problems with the flavors. So as I mentioned, OpenBSD runs on a lot of different platforms, and it's not just well, i386 or AMD 64, it's HPPA, it's Alpha, it's MIPS 64. And earlier today, well, before today, I thought we were kind of lagging behind with defaulting to Ruby 1.9 for Puppet. But apparently, with the quick poll this morning, a lot of people are still using 1.8, so I feel slightly less bad now. However, we do want to move forward with the Ruby version, because when we switched from 1.8 to 1.9, it was about the same time as we switched from Puppet 2 to 3, and speed differences were tremendous. And we're probably not going to see the same with switching to 2.0, but it is, well, high up there, except for the fact there are two exotic platforms which kind of stole the effort, Alpha and HPPA, and I'm not really sure if anyone with the right mind would actually run Puppet on these platforms, since they're quite ancient, power-hungry, and, well, underpowered. So we may just not bother fixing Ruby for them, actually, since it's not so much Puppet that doesn't work on them, it's Ruby itself. And looking even further forward, Ruby 2.1 is still far away, as well. A platform that I actually use myself is broken with Ruby 2.1 on OpenBSD, which is MIPS 64, which is the base for the Octeon, as well as SGI and Longsoon, which is a little Indian 64-bit CPU from China. So let's have a quick look at all the the work that went into porting Puppet to OpenBSD. I'm gonna quickly run through the components one by one. So of course it starts out with Ruby, and as I mentioned, Puppet itself is pretty portable. It's just Ruby that's slightly less so. Actually, there was a bug in Ruby 1.9 and above in the, well, pardon my French, the peephole optimizer, which affected a lot of, well, architectures aside from Spark 64, but that was the most obvious one. Fixing that allowed us to switch to 1.9. The user resource on Puppet has a password attribute. This actually requires having the manager's password feature enabled, which gets automatically set when Puppet notices that the lib shadow library is present. We didn't have support for this for a long time, and back well, a couple of years ago I wanted to add the, well, non-Linux backend to lib shadow. I had some other higher priorities, things to take care of at the time, so I didn't quite bother until looking at it a few months ago, and they had support for FreeBSD as well as Darwin. So there was a free ride for us, and that's committed to OpenBSD ports as well now. Factor, I added support for quite some new facts, or rather extend the support to OpenBSD for several facts. And as OpenSSH is developed as part of OpenBSD, we're the first ones to get access to the shiny new key types, including the ED24519 key type, which has been released with OpenSSH 6.5. And due to the fact that, well, obviously I run OpenBSD, I had to add support for these new keys to Factor, as well as to Puppet. So in Puppet, I mainly worked on the package provider. The first thing that I did was the package.conf support, which basically prevented a need for setting a source parameter, which is similar to your sources.list or your yum repositories. So in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over the nitty-gritty details of the other features, but they're just like flags which a provider can implement. There was remount support added for OpenBSD or BSD in general, so you didn't need to unmount and remount a file system. It would automatically set the new flags, and new key type support for the SSH key and the authorized key types in Puppet. PuppetDB, being a Java application, didn't need too much porting itself. It was just the rake files and installation scripts, and adding a OpenBSD rc.d script, which were the main efforts here. And actually, the Puppet M Collective module was a prime example of not being really portable. I mean, it worked great once these issues were fixed, and I'll quickly touch upon those in the next section. So some outstanding tasks right now. That's implementing the ensure latest feature on OpenBSD. There was a pull request for it. Sadly, it stalled as there were quite some issues to address still. It's being shipped in OpenBSD, in the OpenBSD Puppet package. So I'm getting some feedback from users that way, at least. A service provider. OpenBSD has its own rc.d framework. We recently contributed a provider for this, and Puppet Labs, Zach Leslie was working on an excellent service provider which eclipses this one, which hopefully will be merged shortly, so you can actually enable and disable services instead of just ensuring that they're currently running. I think we've touched this already. There are some outstanding patches that need to be submitted. As I mentioned, the UID 500 to 1000 one, and some additional facts. So very quickly, one thing that's quite common is just hard coding a group, especially the root group. It'll work on Linux just fine, but for the sake of portability, either use group 0, which is the group ID. It'll work on Linux and OpenBSD, or make it variable. Same thing basically with users and groups. ActiveMQ without an underscore is a perfectly fine system group or user on Linux. However, on OpenBSD we prefix system users and groups with an underscore. So you probably want to make it variable. Same for package names. I mean, ActiveMQ is maybe the same for Linux. However, Apache, whether it's Apache 2 or HTTPD, that's a more common example where it can be made a variable. But on OpenBSD, ActiveMQ is actually named Apache ActiveMQ. And finally, just thinking that setting a default value in your case switches is a smart idea, you'd better just fail. So people who run your module on a platform that you did not anticipate they would run it on, they'll actually have a chance to fix it instead of running into some undefined behavior. So to close off, I'd like to thank these three people for working on my pull requests and contributing some valuable feedback, and finally merging my work. So thank you. In case you haven't tried OpenBSD yet, please do give it a try. It's available from openbsd.org, and pkg@puppet is the rest you'll need. Thanks. Are there any questions before the break?
Are the ported audio changes usable for FreeBSD?
I think in some of the factor facts I did include support for FreeBSD, and in factor I added a generic way of calling syscontrol. to get facts, regardless of the operating system underneath. However, most things are OpenBSD specific. But since there is a BSD reference already, it should be a lot easier to implement FreeBSD support.